With that, I would like to introduce Ruchira Gupta, founder, president of Apne App International. As we have heard, civil society has a tremendous role to play in combating trafficking in human beings, as well as in promoting survivors' voices. Ruchira has been doing incredible work and not just promoting survivors' voices, but also ensuring that during COVID-19, survivors and victims of trafficking have access to food and other basic necessities. Ruchira, the screen is yours.
Thank you, Tatiana. I bring greetings and namastes all the way from India and the US on behalf of survivors of trafficking who are very honored that you've included our voices in this panel today to mark the World Day Against Human Trafficking. My NGO, Apne App, represents about 20,000 survivors of prostitution and children in India, and we work with about 28 other NGOs across the world, from the to Abolish Prostitution and the Coalition Against Trafficking in Women, to make sure that the voices of survivors are never forgotten and their basic needs are recognized as human rights. So thank you, a big thank you to Tatiana's leadership in OSCE ODR for making sure that survivor voices were included every step of the way, for the National Referral Mechanism Handbook, for the fact sheet, and in today's event, which will have many facets to it. This is a long journey, and it's 22 years since the UN Protocol to End Trafficking in Persons was established. And we've come a long way, as I can see from the panel. A big thank you to the leadership of UNODC and UNHCR as well, and ICAT for consolidating the work that we are doing and taking it forward with the inclusion of survivor voices. And Chandra Baburun too, who is the chair of the International Survivors Advisory Council. Thank you to all of you. Today, I'm just here to mention a few things. COVID has been devastating to everybody in general, but it has been particularly devastating to victims and survivors of human trafficking. Most services in most countries actually came to a halt when COVID hit, due to the lockdowns, due to the failure of public health facilities, and also due to the collapse of education systems. Besides that, what also happened across the world globally and in my own country, India, was that essential services for survivors and their children came to a grinding halt. There were shelters which ran out of food, domestic violence hotlines stopped working, child protection services were absolutely non existent. Survivors and their children had to make do inside red light areas, sometimes in small rooms with no windows, 11 people to a room, because the children had been sent back from the boarding schools into the brothels. Transportation was closed down in my country in repeated lockdowns. So the survivors could not leave the red light area. There were police curfew like conditions, and many survivors who were transitioning to daily wage work lost any income. They sold their last gold chain. They had no savings. They got into the clutches of money lenders. And there was a steep spike in sex trafficking. Sex predators began to show up in the red light areas, telling the survivors that we will give you food if you let your children perform in sex videos. Also, survivors were forced to participate in very violent acts just in return for food. So, today I just wanted to share the kind of challenges that survivors faced. Along with that, I want to mention the heroic efforts of civil society to fill this gap. Most civil societies across the organization were on the ground because they provide services and do community organizing, just where the what has impacted on the lives of these very precarious women and children is not going to go away overnight, even when many of us, most of us, are vaccinated. Livelihoods have disappeared. Children have lost 2 years, 3 years of schooling, and they have got into the workforce. So the recommendations that we have to the esteemed panel of policymakers today from the UN and other bodies like OSCE is to create a coordinated response and recommendations to the governments of the world, asking them to have fiscal stimuli for survivors of prostitution, those at risk to prostitution, so they can build back their lives, to make sure there are crisis management services for the next 5 years, so that if systems break down, nobody forgets the person I call the last girl, who's the 13-year-old in a brothel or the 19-year-old in a street corner in America or India. And to make sure that children's programs are activated so that they can access online education, because the lockdowns are going to continue intermittently, and many children have just dropped out because they don't have Wi-Fi plans or computers, and they now are at risk and being recruited by traffickers. We also recommend for governments across the world that survivors not be forgotten in the new measures that are being implemented in terms of health services. Very often, health services reach the middle class, but they don't reach the most vulnerable areas. And many children inside the red light areas, as a result, have lost a parent, or a parent has lost a livelihood. So we need to create a special fund for health services for these areas, and also make sure that those who have lost their parents have a cushioning financial package which will look after them. So these are our broad recommendations. And of course, we have an impact assessment report and lessons learned from the supply chains that we created during the COVID crisis to get food to the last girl in the brothels of India. We called the campaign 1 million meals, but eventually we scaled it up to 12 million meals over the last 18 months. And we have served more than 250,000 women and girls just by starting to do what we could, responding to a WhatsApp message from a little girl who had been sent back home from a brothel from her boarding school, and she was starving. And I put like 500 meals into the trunk of my car and took it to her. And there were 2,000 people in line. So through virtual WhatsApp group, we created a human chain with factory owners and truck drivers and community mobilizers and students and civil society actors who were really the glue to get this going. And we can continue to do this. We are just one example of many of the civil society organizations who are on this call today attending this meeting. So I just want to just say that on World Day Against Human Trafficking, we have to collaborate across agencies, across sectors, and carry on, because the challenge is not going to go away. COVID shows that we are interconnected. The virus does not recognize rich or poor, black or white, woman or man, a survivor or a person of privilege. And therefore, even our solution has to be based on collaboration. Thank you very much. And I look forward to you all visiting our virtual feminist museum today. At the end of the program, Simone Hine is here, who's the curator. She's a young woman based in London, and we have collaborated with Pankhurst Center and Smith College to produce this museum. Thank you very much. Namaste.